Good evening, everybody. Alan Stout here from the Music on the Menu radio show, doing one of our occasional podcasts from home. I first started doing the talking podcasts during COVID. Did, I think, 5 or 6 of them just talking about music, and then we did a whole interview series with people from the local community of music talking about how they were navigating through the pandemic. And then since then, maybe I've done 3 or 4 over the last few years, but I've done a couple of them over the last year or so regarding rock movies that have come out to the theaters. The last 4 times that I've been to a movie theater was to see A Complete Unknown, the Bob Dylan biopic, Becoming Led Zeppelin, the documentary about the early days of Led Zeppelin, Deliver Me From Nowhere, the Bruce Springsteen film that came out last year, which chronicled the making of the Nebraska album. And I did podcasts about all those movies. And so tonight I'm coming to you because I literally just got back from a theater down just outside of Allentown. And I saw the new Elvis Presley concert film, EPiC, Elvis Presley in Concert, directed by Baz Luhrmann. Baz is the same director, of course, who did the great Elvis biopic about 3 years ago, which Austin Butler won a Golden Globe for Best Actor. I believe the film was even up for Best. There was a lot. It got a lot of Academy Award nominations, a couple of them, and it did win a big Golden Globe. It was a really, really good movie about Elvis. And he also did the Netflix documentary about a year and a half ago, about the 1968 television special. I call it the 68 television special and not the comeback special because obviously the night that it aired on television, they weren't calling it the comeback special. It earned that name years later when people looked back and realized what a important moment that was for Elvis Presley's career, because it did lead to a comeback of him regaining a lot of momentum as a musician, because at that point he had been making movies and mediocre soundtracks for a couple of years. And so the 1968 television special, which we now call the comeback special, was also given the Baz Luhrmann treatment on Netflix about a year and a half ago. A really nice little documentary just about that. So EPiC is Baz's 3rd Elvis Presley movie, basically, in about 5 years. He is a big fan. And as I sit here tonight talking about his latest film, I do these podcasts from my home bar in my basement of my home, which is basically my own little hard rock cafe. It's decorated with a lot of memorabilia from my career in music journalism and just posters, framed posters of some of my all-time favorite artists. And so I'm looking over to my left and I see a framed poster of Elvis Presley from the 1968 television special. And across the room on my top bookshelf, I see some pictures of when I went to Graceland and a complete library of books and DVDs on Elvis. So pretty much all the books that were written about him, all the major ones, and all the concert films that he's put out, I own them. I am a fan myself, although I don't know if I could sit at the same table as Baz. But I've been a fan since I was a little boy, and so I was excited about this movie. A little bit of background about the film, and I know it's gotten a lot of press and some great reviews over the last couple of days, but for those who aren't familiar, when Baz was making the Elvis biopic, he was told about this long-rumored, unreleased Elvis Presley concert footage that was in storage somewhere that were from the 1970 Elvis Presley concert documentary, That's the Way It Is, and from the 1972 documentary Elvis On Tour. They're both great Elvis Presley concert films. I own them both. I could see the DVD sitting on my shelf across the room from where I'm sitting right now. That's the Way It Is chronicled one of Elvis's first residencies in Vegas in 1969, 70, when he first started performing again. And then Elvis On Tour was pretty much from his 1972 tour of the United States. And so when Baz was working on biopic, someone said, there's a lot more video out there from those two concert films. And so, being the big fan that he is, and the wealth that he has, and what he was trying to do with that biopic, which was, really gain any sort of insight he could on Elvis Presley as a performer, he went out and found those videos. They were at an MGM storage facility, a salt mine underground, for 50 years. And I've seen some interviews recently where he said they went in there, he hired people to go try to find them, and I think they found 67 reels of unreleased Elvis Presley concert footage from those two films. So you're talking about from 1970 to 72. And they also found a 40 to 45 minute interview with Elvis Presley. And that in itself was rather extraordinary, because I don't know if a lot of people realize this, but Elvis Presley did not do a lot of interviews. If you think about it, all those movies that he made in the 60s, did you ever see a clip of him sitting down on the Tonight Show, plug in one of his movies? No. When he was doing Aloha from Hawaii in 73, is there a video of him, talking to Johnny Carson about how he's getting ready to do this big global satellite show? No. Some of the great writers from Rolling Stone from the 70s, Robert Hilburn, who wrote the great Cornflakes with John Lennon book, highly recommend that book. Or Dave Marsh from Rolling Stone, who has written a lot about Elvis and wrote the liner notes to some of his box sets. Have you ever read an interview with Dave Marsh or Robert Hilburn from the 70s with Elvis? Have you ever seen a 5-page cover story from the 70s where they sat down with Elvis? No. He didn't do a lot of interviews. He did some press conferences. I think he did one for Aloha from Hawaii, and he did one for when he went to Madison Square Garden for the first time in 72. But to unearth a fairly lengthy interview with Elvis where he talks about his career in a very candid and relaxed way, that inspired Baz, along with the unreleased footage, to try to make something special out of it. And that is exactly what he has done with EPiC, Elvis Presley in Concert. I'll just get right to it and say that I own them all. I have Aloha from Hawaii. I have That's the Way It Is. I have Elvis On Tour. I have the 68 special. This is the best representation of Elvis Presley as a live performer that's ever been put together. And I think that was probably exactly what he wanted to do. And he did it. I drove an hour tonight because I wanted to see it in HD. It will be open in theaters everywhere this weekend coming up. But the HD screenings, I think, are just limited to this weekend. And unfortunately, we have some IMAX theaters here. Did I say HD? I meant to say IMAX. You know what I meant. Same thing, in a way. We have IMAX in Music at Cinemark and in Bloomsburg and Hazleton. And they weren't showing the film. Dixon City has an IMAX. They weren't showing it this weekend. And so I said, well, round up a couple of my buddies, that two good old friends of mine that actually went to Graceland and Sun Studio with me. We had a boys' weekend with two of my old buddies from high school back in 2013, and we did the whole Memphis thing. And I reached out to those dudes this week, and I said, hey, you want to make a little road trip down to Allentown on Saturday and see this movie? And they were all in. And so I could tell you that I had a feeling from what I was reading that it was going to be bigger and just more thought put into it than anything that had been done on Elvis before, in capturing him as a live performer. And that's exactly what it does. The footage from That's the Way It Is, one of the great things about that original concert documentary was some of the rehearsal footage. Elvis was just getting back to touring and playing live. Actually, he wasn't even really touring yet. He was just doing Vegas. And he came into these sessions. He put an incredible band together, great musicians, great backing singers. And he was just having a blast during the rehearsals, sitting on a stool in the middle of the studio, calling out songs, working on arrangements, laughing. And I always loved that part of That's the Way It Is. And then that film shows that, and then it segues into the concert. What Baz did was he weaves all of that through the whole movie. And so maybe Elvis is performing, Polk Salad Annie, and he's working on it in the studio with the band, and they'll show a clip of that, and then they'll cut to it on the concert stage. And he's such a great director, he does this seamlessly. And so you're hearing the song all the way through, or halfway through, however much he decides to include in the film, but you're seeing him maybe, there are some of them where he's even rehearsing it on different days. And so, he's got a different clothes on. So you're seeing him one day in the studio hashing out the song with the band. Then he's up on stage, in all of his splendor with the jumpsuit and the lights and the crowd. And then he's back in the studio again. And it's almost like there are little music videos inside the film for quite a number of the songs. And so, just from a cinematic standpoint and an artistic standpoint, the approach that he took in taking the rehearsal stuff from That's the Way It Is and the concert stuff, which I think is the best concert stuff that we have of Elvis, by the way. Better than Aloha, better than Elvis on Tour. The shows that he did in Vegas in 1970, he was very new still to performing live again, but it wasn't his first residency. His first one, I think, was in 1969. So he got the rust off a little bit, and he had just got it down. And I feel that that's an underrated album, That's the Way It Is, and also an underrated film. And so Baz has taken the best stuff from that film and the unreleased stuff from that film and the unreleased rehearsal stuff from that film and married all the video up to the master files of the original soundboard recordings and has really brought it to an incredible life. And so that's the first thing that you should know about the film, is just the way he took it all. And instead of saying, well, we'll start with the rehearsals and then we'll go to That's the Way It Is, because that happened in 1970, and then we'll move on to Elvis on Tour. He didn't do that at all. It's all woven in throughout the whole movie. Whenever he felt that the momentum and the sequencing of the film made sense, because Elvis changed his set list often. I know this from just being a fan and having his live albums. And so, for example, I think Elvis Presley's best live album is Live from Madison Square Garden. It's the best set list that he ever did, probably. Well, he did Aloha from Hawaii like a year later, and so he wanted to change the set list. He didn't want the set list to be the same as an album that he just put out. But in a way, I wish he didn't, because Aloha was such an extraordinary event with 1 billion people watching around the world that he probably just said, well, so hell with it, I'm going to put my best set list together. He opens in Madison Square Garden with That's All Right. And so Baz, I think, is cognizant of all that kind of stuff. So, not only am I going to put this movie together and take the best footage from 2 concert films and all the unreleased stuff, I might as well just put together the best Elvis Presley set list that I could do based on the material I have. And so whether he's doing That's All Right or Are You Lonesome Tonight, or You've Got That Loving Feeling, which if you've never heard Elvis Presley's version of that from That's the Way It Is, you got to hear it. He really has harnessed it all in a spectacular way. And, some of the headlines that I read, and I didn't read the reviews because I knew I wanted to do my own, but I saw the headlines this week. You couldn't miss them, at least my algorithm. And whether it was dazzling or electrifying or extraordinary, a triumph, all those blurb headlines, but they were really, were accurate, because you're seeing the most significant entertainer of the 20th century in his prime with a perfect picture. They took all of the video to Peter Jackson's studio. Peter Jackson, of course, is the great film director who did the Let It Be mini series for, was it Netflix or Amazon? It streamed 4 years ago. It's like 6 hours of all the Let It Be footage. And it really, it also got incredible reviews, as it should, because not only of the content and how he reshaped the whole image of that band at the end, because the original Let It Be film did not capture it at all, but he remastered it. The technology is now there to really make it look like it was filmed yesterday in HD. And so we're seeing Elvis Presley in his prime, looking better than he ever did, singing better than he ever did, on a beautiful, beautiful shot professional video, given the most state-of-the-art treatment that it could be given. And so, and because he's such a fan and he gets it, Baz, he did things within the film that I'd never seen before. There's some stuff in the movie of Elvis doing Burning Love. I don't remember seeing that. There might have been a little bit of it in Elvis On Tour, the 72 doc. The song wasn't even out yet for That's the Way It Is. But what he basically does is within the film for those 3 minutes, he almost makes a music video for Burning Love, because he's got him in the studio rehearsing it. He's got him on stage performing it. He does a quick montage video of the planes landing and the tour and him walking off stage and him running down the hallway to get into the limo chased by the fans. And, it reminded me of, like, in the 80s, if this was going to be a release to help promote the film, if they took a film, a segment from the film to send it to MTV, like Prince did with Let's Go Crazy from Purple Rain, for example. Imagine this movie was coming out in the 80s, this epic movie. Well, the Burning Love would have been the video for MTV to promote the movie. That's basically what Baz did. In the middle of the movie, he just made, for the first time ever, a fantastic 3-minute segment of that song. And he did the same thing that he did throughout the rest of the film, in that it's multi-performances of it segued into one. So there's the rehearsal, there's, that song was really new. And Elvis, that was Elvis's last top 10 hit. Yeah, I think it peaked at number 2 in 72. I know it did. And I know this from reading Peter Gerlanic's books, which are fantastic. They're the definitive Elvis Presley books, both of Peter's books. But he wasn't into that song, Elvis. He was going through a divorce at the time, and Elvis was feeling a little, if you watch Elvis singing Always on My Mind in the movie, which you will see, that's the song that was connecting with him at the time. That's a song about maybe regretting the end of a relationship, which, he was going through a divorce with the love of his life at the time. And so I had always heard that he almost had to be talked into recording Burning Love. Well, what you see in the movie is that, whatever he was feeling, he did get over it, because he's putting a lot into the song. And it's really one of the most fun parts of the movie. is seeing him doing that. And of course, towards the end of the movie, we see Suspicious Minds, which was Elvis's last #1 song. And at the time that he's doing these shows in Vegas, the song is maybe not even 2 years old. And so it's still fresh to him. It's still exciting to the audience because it's still basically a big hit. And I think that Baz probably saved that towards the end for a reason. It was almost like an encore. And so he puts all this into the film. I think Elvis Presley had two peaks as an artist. One was from 1956 to 1960. And of course, 2 of those years he was in the Army. So you really want to go maybe 56 to 58. But I think a lot of people forget that when he came out of the Army, he made some really great records. My favorite Elvis Presley record is probably Elvis Presley Greatest Hits Volume 3, which has his latest Flame, Little Sister, Are You Lonesome Tonight, I Gotta Know. He did some really, just It's Now or Never is on there, which, is incredible vocal performance. All that stuff he did right when he got out of the Army, before he went to Hollywood pretty much exclusively for the next 6-7 years, and basically made some good movies, some not, and a lot of mediocre soundtrack songs. So you gotta put his peak at 56 to 60, his initial peak, and then I think his all-time peak is from 68, from the television special, until 72, because after 72, he really toured a lot, and probably too much, and we all know, too, that some of his vices started to catch up with him. But in these 2 films, he's pretty clear-eyed, focused, great shape, on point, and still excited about performing, because he's only been doing it. In the first film, that's the way it is. He's only been doing it for a year. And by Elvis on Tour, he had only really been doing it for 3 years. And so this is a guy who's still in his mid-30s, is excited about performing. He puts together an incredible band. He is engaging on stage. He is humble. He is unpretentious. He is self-deprecating. He will change the words to lyrics just to get a laugh sometimes. He calls out songs. He had a long set list. And so, well, not a set list. He didn't really have a set list. He had a long repertoire. And so he could change the set list anytime during the show. So whatever song he felt like singing, he would just tell the band, this is what we're doing. Not a lot of bands do that. That's usually associated these days with the jam bands more than anybody. Elvis was doing that in Vegas in 69, 70s. He was on tour in 72, which I thought was fascinating. He had fun with his band. He enjoyed everything about it. He enjoyed the rehearsals. He enjoyed the audience. And throughout this film, you're seeing somebody, at the peak of their powers, doing something that they still love. And, if you've seen, the 1977 CBS television special, which Elvis Presley Enterprise has never released. They will not release it. You can buy the album, but they haven't put it out on video, because Elvis sang so well, so beautifully. I mean, if you saw the Austin Butler film, that's where they pulled My Way and some of those great performances, Unchained Melody, which was amazing. He was still singing. His voice never failed him. His voice never failed him, ever, right till the end. But physically he was failing. And that's part of the reason that you'll never see that officially released. And so I think that Baz knew where to cap this movie. And maybe he could have gone into, maybe there's some footage out there from Elvis's tours in 74, 5, 6, 7. But this is the king, man. I mean, this is that second peak, 68 to 72. He just really, I read some of the reviews, the headlines, and just yesterday, and I saw 2 headlines from major publications. It was Variety, New York Times, LA Times, Toronto Star, Rolling Stone. And 2 of the headlines that I saw said that this was the best concert film ever made. That's high praise. You know, I'm thinking about Led Zeppelin, The Song Remains the Same. Rolling Stones, Let's Spend the Night Together. I mean, there's a lot of them that are, it's not unusual for a band to release a home video of their concert tour. You know, almost every band after the tour, they'll put out a DVD of the concert tour. But one that was made for the theater, there aren't as many of those, but there have been some big ones. I've seen them all, and I have to agree. Because of who it is. You know, there's talk now, you see a lot of people, I myself have just been starting to mess around with artificial intelligence a little bit, and, you know, experimenting with graphics, and, you know, you see all the AI stuff on social media of Elvis today. I saw one where he was on a talk show. It was like if he didn't die, and he was in the 80s, and he was sitting there being interviewed by Letterman or somebody, talking about how, you know, he was looking forward to getting on the road back out on tour. And, you know, they can do incredible things. It looked like Elvis would have looked in his 50s talking, and it was his. I saw some funny ones where he was a race car driver, and he had just won the Daytona 500, and they interview him, and he said something like, "Hey man, that was like wrestling a tornado out there," and it sounded like something Elvis would have said, and it looked just like him, and it was harmless, and it wasn't disrespectful. It was kind of done by a fan, you could tell. But then you hear people talking about avatars, and that's how some of the great bands are going to be replaced. That they'll just have like a hologram avatar concert. The technology is going so fast that you'll go to a theater and you'll see what looks like your favorite band on stage. And so, you know, who knows where we're going with all this stuff, but what Baz Luhrmann has done for Elvis Presley is he has made all of that unnecessary. There's no need for that. You know, they did a concert tour about 20 years ago where they had Elvis concert footage and his band playing underneath the video screen. And people thought that was amazing. Like, oh, it's almost like going to see Elvis in concert because it's his band and you watch the video, but that's not really what Baz Luhrmann has done, especially if you could see it in a theater, is really make you feel like you're at an Elvis Presley concert. And beautifully weaving in the interview to narrate it a little bit, and using the multi-edits and the quick edits like he likes to do. Sometimes it feels like a music video. Sometimes he lets it breathe a little bit. He knows when to let it go. He knows when to stay with something for 2-3 straight minutes. It's made all of that stuff obsolete when it comes to Elvis. You'll never need an avatar tour. You'll never need an AI representation of a concert. Just watch this movie. That's all you need to do. You know, Baz said that one of the reasons that he's so grateful to do it is because Elvis never got to tour. Oh, Baz did some funny stuff too. Like there's a real small segment on the Colonel, and the background music while they're showing the Colonel as devil in disguise. So, you know, there's a little bit of a jab there. The Colonel is a tough character to figure out. I've had this conversation with a couple my two buddies who I was with tonight and who I went to Graceland with. I said, the guy gets criticized so much because he, was a shyster and he didn't always put Elvis's best interests first. And so that's the criticism. Supposedly he was an illegal alien and that's why Elvis never toured overseas. He was afraid to leave the country. He wouldn't be able to get back in. We've all heard that story. But, so that's fair criticism. And yet he took this kid who was getting a little bit of airplay from a small record label in Memphis and turned him into the biggest pop star, rock star that ever lived. The most significant entertainer of the 20th century. His alternative to not touring the country, the world, the Colonel's, was Aloha. He said, well, we don't have to tour the whole world, Elvis. We'll just do a satellite concert. And 1 billion people watched it. And so we criticized the Colonel for not always doing what was right by Elvis, and yet he turned this kid from Memphis into the biggest star of all time and put him on a concert that was watched by more people than's ever watched anything in the history of TV. And so you got to kind of balance your criticism and remember some of those things, but I did think it was funny that he put Devil in Disguise behind the segment on the Colonel. A wonderful film. Definitely try to see it on the big screen if you're a fan. I think it's important for people that are, if you're listening to this podcast and, probably 30 minutes in now, and you're still with me, and you follow me on my radio show, or you used to read my stuff in the newspaper, or you listen to some of the other podcasts I did, well, then obviously you're a fan of rock music. I think that as a rock music fan, you need to know Presley. It's a requirement. You need to understand him. You need to understand his significance. And so I've had some opportunities over the years to write about him on the anniversary of his passing. My trip to Graceland, I interviewed Lisa Marie. I'm very fortunate to do all those things. And I feel like it's my job sometimes to remind people of who he is and what he meant. And on a much, much, much higher level, you'll see the Springsteens of the world and the Bonos of the world, who Bono has some things to say at the end of this film. You'll see them do that too. If you're a Christian, you need to know the New Testament and the Acts of the Apostles. If you're of the Jewish faith, you need to know the Old Testament. If you're of the Muslim faith, you need to know the Quran. If you're of the faith of rock and roll, you need to know the Elvis Presley Sun Sessions, and you need to know, the story of what he did and what he meant. And, the reason I'm sitting in this room in my basement right now with my collection of my favorite rock memorabilia would not be here if it wasn't for Elvis Presley. And so when someone like Baz Luhrmann comes along and he could do what it seems happens every generation now. Every generation there is something. If you recall, about 20 years ago, they put out an Elvis Presley record of his number one songs, and a little less conversation, a little more action became a global hit. Think about the number one in England. And so every generation, it seems like there is this, yes, we're moving forward. Yes, music is changing. Yes, everything's digital now. Yes, it's all about streaming. Yes, concerts are way too much money. Yes, yeah, everything's going. Yes, hip-hop has knocked rock bands off the charts, at least temporarily. But every once in a while, boom, someone will come back and say, wait a minute, don't forget about the king. And so Baz has done that in a beautiful way. I highly recommend going to see EPiC, Elvis Presley in Concert. I highly recommend trying to see it on an HD screen. It's worth a couple more bucks. An IMAX screen. Because the IMAX is not just about the video, it's obviously about the sound, and this is all about music. This movie, it's all about the music, nothing else. Maybe that's why I loved it so much too. And if you can't see it in IMAX, just go see it on the big screen while you can. You know how it is these days with movies. Doesn't matter how successful they are. They're never in the theater too long. Everybody wants to get it on streaming right away. So next couple weeks, if you can, I would go out and see it. And, I would like to thank Baz Luhrmann for once again recrowning our mighty king. Catch you next time.